Alright, well, here we are getting started, but this sort of hand showcases the issue with running a deck with only 20 lands. This no land hand happens more often. If we had a one land, even one land in this hand, it could be a keep, but we are going to ship it. And looks like we've got two lands here. This hand does have some issues. Even though we've got four burn spells, we also don't have any green source. Don't have any creature to start. We'd like to have a creature, but let's go ahead and keep. And okay, so we have a Goblin Guide on top. We're going to keep that. And our opponent is going to be on the play here. So we'll see what they're up to. Looks like Island and Aether Vial, so that could very well mean Merfolk. So we're just going to try to get him dead as quickly as we possibly can. If we were on the play, well, being on the play with Goblin Guide is definitely better than being on the draw, but we'll still take this. And so we saw Dismember revealed off the Goblin Guide. We actually don't mind our opponent having Dismember that much. If our opponent does kill the Goblin Guide, with Dismember, they're still going to be taking 4 points out of their life total. So, looks like if our opponent does that, they're going to fall down to 14. And we actually have 15 points of burn here. So, we're just going to go ahead and get started with our burn spells. We do have to be worried about something like a Curse Catcher, so let's start out with a Lava Spike, and then we're going to suspend Rift Bolt, and then if our opponent does have a Curse Catcher, we can see it come in here, but it looks like no Curse Catcher. So if our opponent's just starting vialing stuff in now, we should not die next turn, and as long as we live one more turn, we should be in good shape. So let's see. Our opponent does have 5 points of power right now, but yeah, we're looking good. Sometimes the blue, the Merfolk decks do play some counters, but if we just draw a land here, we should be able to close the game out on our turn. And not a land, it's an Eidolon of the Great Revel. So we could play Eidolon of the Great Revel here, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense because we want to just be Lava Spiking here just to make sure we can kill our opponent on our next turn. So let's go ahead and fire off these Lava Spikes. Our opponent's going to go down to 2, and then we're just going to pass. Sometimes this is how the game goes. It's not that interactive. If our opponent had had an actual removal spell rather than Dismember, this could have been different, but it looks like our opponent is going to have multiple lords this turn, which isn't a surprise. So that basically means if we don't kill our opponent on our turn, for some reason we are going to lose. So we're hoping our opponent doesn't have a Spell Pierce or something like that, and go for it here. And okay. So we were able to win that one. So we're looking at the sideboard here, and we want to look at all of our options. We saw just how important having a high density of actual burn spells is in the matchup. So we do want to keep that in mind, but our removal is also pretty good. Our Path to Exiles, a card like Grim Lavamancer can be able to shoot down creatures. Lightning Helix is pretty nice. So we're going to take a look here at what it's going to look like if we want to go ahead and board in some additional removal. Some of this can also be used as burn. But the Merfolk deck doesn't have a lot of ways to deal with our creatures. So a card like Eidolon of the Great Revel, I like a lot if we're on the play. However, on the draw, it's not really doing quite enough to warrant being in the deck, because a lot of times it just comes down to a race, and we're not, like you saw that game, we had Eidolon in hand, but we didn't actually have time to cast it, and that can happen for sure. So I'm actually fine with just taking out every single Eidolon of the Great Revel in our deck. And then we're going to need 2 additional cuts. Atarka's Command is a card I'm fine with cutting here. It is nice to sometimes be able to pump our team and such, but our opponent isn't going to be gaining life, so that part of the card isn't going to be important here. So I like Boros Charm a little bit more, just to be able to deal 4 every single time. And we're going to keep the rest of our creatures in, still keeping the Goblin Guides in, and we're going to submit here. We'll see. Sometimes you do draw a path and it's a bit awkward because you're like, I just wish this was a burn spell, but other times you actually really just need it to stay alive. So here we have a 1-land hand, couple of Goblin Guides here. We're definitely looking for another land, but this is a hand where you kind of keep it and you're hoping to draw that second land. But even if you don't, you have Goblin Guides. We have cards we can at least play from our hand. So that's why I'm electing to keep here. And we drew a land, which is nice, but let's start on the mountain anyways. Always want to start on the creatures that are able to get in damage. Get in your creature damage first, but it looks like our opponent has boarded in Chalice of the Void, so as we saw that being revealed on top. So that's a card we weren't necessarily prepared for. We could have brought in Destructive Revelry if we had wanted to. Elected not to do so, and we're kind of getting punished by choosing not to bring in the Destructive Revelries. We have a bunch of cards in hand that we cannot cast, but we're just going to continue on with the game plan. Master of the Pearl Trident is being revealed here. As far as I know, not every Merfolk list is playing Chalice. Some are, and we've run into it here. We can elect to board in some Destructive Revelries for game 2. And this Harbinger of the Tides is kind of a blowout. Bouncing our Goblin Guide is basically going to mean that now we cannot cast any of our 1-mana spells. So we're in a lot of trouble here. But let's go ahead and get a Sacred Foundry. And proceed as if this wasn't really bad news. Riftbolt is going to come off Suspend. We can take out this Harbinger of the Tides. And yeah, I mean, this is just one of those unfortunate situations where we're almost fully locked out of the game. Chalice is one of those hate cards where even if our opponent had it and we were on the play, we would be able to get in our other Goblin Guide. We would have more going on. We would have cast more of our spells. As it is, well, it looks like our opponent doesn't really know how Chalice fully interacts with their creatures, but we're in a world of hurt. We can fire off this Lightning Helix now if we want to, but we're just going to have a bunch of stuff that we cannot cast this game. So yeah, I mean, it's just a rough spot to be in. So we're going to take the hit from the Master of the Pearl Trident. And sometimes games of Modern go like this. Your opponent has the necessary hate card, and yeah, we're just going to pack it in and go to game 3. So we have 4 Destructive Revelries in the board. Currently, obviously regretting not boarding them in for game 2. We can board in some of them for game 3. I still don't want to board in all of them. Our opponent could be boarding out Aether Vial, for example, so they might not have that many targets. So I think we want to board in a couple. If we were on the play that game, we would have at least gotten more stuff onto the board. So I think boarding in, yeah, like 2 is pretty reasonable. And in exchange for them, we may actually just want to go ahead and try to play a longer game and start taking out some lava spikes. And sometimes with Burn, you're boarding into a little bit more of a answer deck after board. Like, we boarded in answers for our opponent's creatures, and then our opponent had a non-creature threat that we were not equipped to deal with in the Chalice. So we can also board in Eidolon here. We are on the play for this game, and that is a pretty significant advantage. So we can go ahead and cut some of our actual burn stuff, since we are boarding in Eidolon, and we're gonna try to come out of the gates with creatures, and then our spot removal will hopefully take us home, and we can shave on some of our actual burn spells, because we really do need a draw backed up by creatures, and we're not going to have a situation like game 1 where we just have burn spells to burn our opponent out. So we have creatures in our hand, 3 of them in fact, so I'm going to go ahead and keep this. And this is the kind of draw we are looking for. We don't have a Destructive Revelry, but even if our opponent does have Chalice, we'll be able to play 3 1-drops before our opponent can get it onto the board. But we do have to be a little bit wary of the fact that we do not currently have a white source in our hand. But we're still going to go ahead and play this Wild Nacatl to start off. If we do draw a fetch land, we can fetch for Sacred Foundry. Otherwise, it's just going to be a 2-2 for right now. So we'll see what our opponent's got going on. We saw Harbinger of the Tides, and now we are seeing our opponent does have Aether Vials. So Destructive Revelry, it's good that we boarded some of those in, definitely, for this game. But just going to go ahead and start deploying our creature threats, getting some damage in early, and we're going to go ahead and finish off this turn with the Grim Lavamancer. And we're definitely hoping our opponent does not drop a Chalice of the Void here, just because our Lightning Bolts would be turned off. But even if that is the case, we've still got a decent amount going on, so it's not like we're completely out of it. Okay, so instead it's going to be a Tidebiter Mage to lock down, presumably, the Nacatl. Okay. But we do have removal for the Tidebiter Mage in our hand. We can actually start here with the Monastery Swiftspear and then play the Tidebiter Mage. And I think I like this, even though it potentially allows our opponent to vial in a Curse Catcher. It still seems like the upside is pretty high on this. And even if our opponent does have a Curse Catcher and counters this, we still have Monastery Swiftspears that are able to get in for 4 damage here. So can't pay for our Lightning Bolt. A little bit unfortunate, but that's okay. Our opponent's pretty much locked into taking this 4 here. And that's going to drop them down to 13. We're also getting closer to having our Grim Lavamancer be turned on, meaning that we just have enough cards in the graveyard to be able to activate it. And looks like our opponent was a bit Curse Catcher flooded. There's another copy. So our opponent's starting to be able to set up their defenses. We have to be worried now about a Lord coming down. We do not want to see that happen, but at the same time, we probably want to just continue on attacking here. If our opponent vials in a Lord, we can lightning bolt it. So we'll see what our opponent does and go ahead and make the first move and attempt to attack with our Swift Spears. So our opponent clearly has something. The question is what it is. And I guess we'll have to wait and see. Alright, so it looks like Mutavault is going to get activated here. So we actually have the opportunity, if we want to go after the Mutavault. Or we could go after the Tiebiter Mage with our Lightning Bolt. But I think I like going after this Mutavault here. So let's do that. And we still have our Grim Lavamancer available to us. So even if our opponent does vial something in, that's not that bad news for us. So we'll see if this Lightning Bolt actually resolves. And it is going to resolve, which is good news. So we'll see if our opponent wants to block. And it looks like the answer is no. Okay, so we're fine with this. We don't need to act prematurely. And it looks like our opponent did not vial anything in here, which is interesting. If they had, we could have shot it down with Grim Lavamancer. So that it may be that our opponent didn't have a Lord. That's unclear, but we're just going to go ahead and take the hit from the Tidebinder Mage. It's putting a little pressure on us, but nothing that we can't handle. And so I think we want to go ahead and now activate the Grim Lavamancer. Although it will put us a little bit vulnerable, in a little bit of a vulnerable situation, we're just going to go ahead and get rid of this Curse Catcher here. Yeah. It's going to clear the way for some of our attacks. And our opponent isn't going to be able to vial something in to save the Curse Catcher. So yeah, Curse Catcher is down, which is nice. And our draw step was a copy of Searing Blaze. So our opponent does have 3 cards in hand, which we have to be worried about. We drew for our turn a copy of Eidolon, so we can play the Eidolon, but we don't have to. So if we attack with our Monastery Swiftspear and our opponent does vial something in, it could be a little bit of a nuisance. So for that reason, just playing the Eidolon is perfectly fine. We can just play Eidolon here, and we don't need to do too much. Although we are hoping that our opponent does not have a card like Master of Waves, because that would be pretty annoying. So yep, our opponent does have the Lord of Atlantis. Kind of what we were thinking might be the case. And that's okay. Our opponent's not going to be able to cast a lot of cheap stuff very easily, just because Eidolon is going to pose an issue as far as that's concerned. And it looks like our opponent is just sitting on 2 Mutavaults and some Merfolk creatures in play. We're still looking for another land, definitely. So I think I like just going ahead and suspending Riftbolt here and just passing back. We want to get more cards in our graveyard for our Grim Lavamancer. And yeah, our opponent was bluff activating the Aether Vial, essentially. The card we really don't want to see is Master of Waves, just because that would be a huge pain. But okay, it looks like our opponent is able to Vial in Silvergill Adept. And of course, with Aether Vial in play, they won't be taking damage from our Eidolon. So definitely a little bit annoying. So we're going to have a bit of a choice here in terms of what we want to do with this Rift Bolt. We can go after the Tidebinder Mage, we can go after the Lord, we can also just go after our opponent straight away. I think we want to get in an attack this turn. So it makes sense to just go for the creature that is pumping all of our opponent's creatures, and that's the Lord. So we are going to take 2 damage for this, but it's going to significantly affect our opponent's board. Unfortunately, we did not draw a land here, but that's okay. We've now got some reasonable attacks. We can actually just send in our 2 Swift Spears and our Eidolon. And so we'll see what our opponent wants to do here. But now they no longer have Mutavaults being a 3/3. Tidebinder Mage is a 2/2. So our opponent's going to have to make some blocks here. And that's going to enable our Grim Lavamancer to be turned on. So we're in a pretty good spot here. Even though it's a close game, our opponent's now trying to figure out how to solve this board, and there may not be a way to. So we'll see what our opponent can do. So it looks like our opponent is actually electing not to block, which would leave them essentially dead to this Searing Blaze if our opponent doesn't have any bounce or any removal. So yeah, I think it's probably correct to just go for essentially what would be the win here. So we're just going to go ahead and attempt to Searing Blaze away the Silvergill Adept and deal our opponent that last point of damage. And yep, that's going to be the match.